Before the slog of art videos gets underway, starting with heads, proportions, and how to draw people, here's an old animation tutorial I made for Opentoonz. I'm currently learning Blender, but Opentoonz is by far the best beginner-friendly animation software I've seen for 2D animations, and it's free, so enjoy.
Hiya! This is a basic beginner's tutorial for 2D animation and simple editing. I personally use Opentoonz and Filmora, with some free extras we'll get to later. Starting with the pre-cool information needed for learning animation, whether you're on your own or in school. Then specifically, Opentoonz, which is free. If you're not completely new or novice to animating in general, skip to here. Now let's begin. Prerequisite to animating is watching the 12 principles of animation, linked here, and getting some art practice and maybe a book or two. And self-discipline. Animation is a timely thing. First thing to truly understand about animation, especially 2D frame-by-frame animation that we're about to learn, is math. Every second of 24 frame per second animation is 24 individual frames, which means every 1 minute is made up of 1,440 frames. Most animations outside of major productions place their frames on 2s or 3s to extend them. When really crunched for time, they'll use only one frame with multiple layers, or a static image with some camera motion, or they'll reuse multiple shots. Maybe flip it. So mathematically, a feature film is at the length of 75 to 210 minutes, and that is 108,000 frames at 75 minutes. 75 minutes. And sure, not every scene and everything is made and framed on ones, but look at this. That's 8 seconds for 178 drawings. Pencil drawings. Even simple shows like Adventure Time have a frame count as high as 7,920. Family Guy has even more than triple that, sitting at 25,000 to 30,000 frames an episode. This was just a fair and good-natured PSA that the shit is beyond tedious at times, especially if you're a perfectionist. Even at 12 frames per second, it's still 720 frames to be worked on individually a minute. And frames, like onions, contain layers. If you want fluid motion, you will have to draw those in-betweens. Tweening in the skeleton tool and the mesh tools only goes so far to not look robotic. Now let's get into Opentoonz. Opentoonz is a pretty good software. Studio Ghibli made it. Enough said, right? But really not. For free, it's quite capable. Buggy as fuck if you do not have good hardware. Most laptops will struggle. My PC cost me around 3 to 4K, and the sensitivity on my brush still goes to shit sometimes. The selection brush deletes whatever is inside it when autosave happens, and if I even think about multiple vector layers and frames while over text tool, the whole thing's just come crashing down. But besides all that, I consider it better than Toon Boom. Don't debate me, I'm not changing. Here's a demo of some things that were made in Opentoonz. It's a great free software. You just have to have good hardware and be smart about your data management and pencil mileage. Link will be in the description. Go download it! When first downloading Opentoonz, it is imperative that you input the FFMPEG. To do so, simply download an FFMPEG, then go to your downloads. If you are a person who constantly deletes and changes their downloads, switch it to a save file. And then open it. Go to the bin, copy the bin, then open Opentoonz, go to your preferences, go to import export, go to FFmpeg path, paste it there, and restart program. Now you can import and export files like GIFs, PNGs, JPEG, and TIFFs, and more. This is extremely important, and has many uses, such as setting backgrounds, drawing from references, rotoscoping, and more. Now, to set up our preferences. General. Keep show startup window for recent projects and getting to settings for new projects easier in case of changes for anything. And always keep that thing to update automatically. Interface. I used the dark theme. Don't want to strain my eyes. And move current frames by clicking X sheet, which is this thing. Everything else you can leave defaults. And visualization. Loading. I always input file to current project, cause like where else would it go? Saving. Always set autosave. Save everything. Import and export. We went over this. This is the FFMPEG. I used a high timeout of 6000 since I input large files. Drawing. Scan PNG file format for the highest pixel quality. Enable auto creation and use X-sheet animation. Decide whether you want to create and hold cells, which will create a new frame whenever you draw in an extended layer or column. I don't do this because I mainly mass produce still frame style animations. I don't really use vector layers, but it's best for your computer so you won't stress over the program crashing as much as you. Tools. I keep on default. X-sheet. It's important to know what cell dragging behavior you want as to quicking moving multiple frames at once. Use the arrow keys to shift cell selection to speed up moving between the X sheet. Animation and preview. I leave defaults. I don't really use the preview render. It fails sometimes, and I rather fail on the final product. Onion skin. It is very important to change to whatever colors are best to see, but not be a distraction and hinder the drawing. So a decent level of transparency. And this is how you use the onion skin. Good clickety clackety. All the other preferences are fine at default. Now let's move on to the actual drawing layout. This is a default look. The timeline is on the bottom, similar to many other programs. You can move the windows around and make the layout how you would like, but make note to lock them in place once satisfied. And check the Windows tab. There's a lot of helpful little shortcuts in there, like the little audio projects and project files for coloring if you want to save the specific color layout of some things. This is your X sheet, where you create levels, also called columns. Same concept as with digital art layers, forming one art piece each from levels to form one frame. Similar thing, each one of these cells form one frame. To create a cell, simply input a brush action on column 1 and it will appear. Set your preferences, it will appear as a Toons raster level, which is the best, just the beast. And you can use these tabs to determine what kind of level you want, and they're color coordinated. Raster level gives you a raster level, but better than that is the Toons raster level that gives you the finer details with pixelation and some extra brush tools. Vector tools are not accessible for raster frames and raster layers. Vector levels have all the tools, no pixelation, but high computation and tedium. I rarely use them, if ever, but they have great line manipulation and tweening capabilities, and they render precise dots per inch so you can zoom in almost infinitely and see no Minecraft, and use them for the final test line of drawing if anything. But note that they appear where you are on your timeline whenever you input on an empty cell, so be mindful of where you are on the timeline when inputting things. Some GIFs come in corrupted or can only be manipulated with the Animate tool, which is okay unless you want to unless you want to edit individual frames. To get around this, simply export the GIF full screen, or however you want it to be seen, as a TIFF, JPEG, or PNG files individually, and then re-input them to use them. I say this is the best way to perform this, but it is also a headache, but will give you the best result working frame by frame. Over to the right top corners are your rooms. Feel free to experiment in them. I mainly use the drawing ink paint for drawings, and also you can have save unused drawings in here to create a frame. Just don't use it, delete it if anything. It'll still be in the column number,
but you can use it for things like, mouth flaps, certain items and angles that you don't want to continuously redraw, and use the selection tool to copy and paste and move around and whatnot. And the X sheet, I use the drag and drop and place cells correctly alongside the Animate tool to properly place things. It's very well to line things up. And most importantly, you got to know what kind of animation you're going with conceptually. So let's begin animating. There are many brushes and textures you can experiment with through the Raster tab and other tabs found here. I mainly use the Raster tab, manga brushes specifically. You can click and drag cells and levels to extend them, but also right click to open up a small options menu to give you even more options to check them out. I mainly use edit cell number. Pro tip: when repeating frames or multiple frames over a long period of time, it's faster to right click and then repeat there, and then just type in where you want it to reach. For most animations, I start with the audio first. It's important to get the auditory visual things lined up conceptually before starting, so you know what kind of images or what sorts of things you're going to put in as far as scenes, references, lip flaps, and backgrounds go. There are two ways to approaching drawing in the cells: keyframing and frame by frame. Keyframing is basically drawing the major poses in between other major poses. This is the style I use, pose to pose. Instead of going motion to motion, you are going posture to posture, scene to scene, major pose to pose. It's a good way to save time. You start by drawing the major poses, called keys, key poses, to get the fluid movement. You go back and draw the extremes, which are the major steps of motion in between the key poses, and then you play it back to see how many in-betweens you will need to achieve that final fluid motion. For simple things like characters, backgrounds, and certain intricacies like still frame animations, I suggest going with the keyframing route. I make a lot of still framed animations where I keyframed poses alongside camera motions. Here's some great examples of some other keyframed still animation in Animators. Animating frame by frame is a bit more difficult and tedious, but provides a lot more fluid motion, and can be a fast way to create fast flowing things like fire, action lines, falling, combat, yada yada yada. You could get away with making some extremely fast movements are only like 2 or 5 frames, like these, or these. If you have the time and really want things on ones to take the time to align them in motion, you use frame to frame, and all the power to you. You can also convey certain motions like staggering by staggering the frame rate by either adding or deleting frames. If you think something looks janky or too fast, stretch it, squash it, delete a couple frames, add a couple frames, play around with it. And now we go to the simple shortcut keys that will speed up your time. Saving time is important for your sanity, so get accustomed to your shortcut keys. If you have a drawing pad with hotkeys, program them accordingly. And use the scroll wheel to zoom, especially with your pen. I recommend the XP Deco 02A. It's the Animate tool, and it is your best friend. It sets a motion keyframe where you can move an entire column or peg, and it only affects something on that column. It can change position, rotate, scale, shear, and center said column or image. It is important to set keys before and after the scenes as to not fuck them up or anything else, for once you change any aspect, it affects the rest of the timeline unless you set it not to, which you should. S is the selection tool, which is your other best friend, similar to the lasso tool in Clip Studio Paint, where you can select and edit a very specific portion of the cell. B is the brush, your ex-wife you can't get over. It draws, sometimes to conclusions. Experiment with brushes, there's a lot of them. G unit is the geometric tool. for making shapes and straight lines. Be mindful that this can't be used with every brush, and size is important. You can increase or decrease your brush size. Y is the text tool for some reason. T is for tape. F is the fill tool to fill in colors and paint in between, closed lines or backgrounds. If you have inside gaps and stuff like that, use the paint brush tool over here to cover up those said gaps and whatnot. E is like universal for eraser, and space is the hand. Hold it down to use it, or it will return to whatever brush you're using. You can also flip images with this simple click and rotate. The Animate tool is your best friend. I use it all the time in nearly every project. I once used it backwards, since the keyframes in motion were at the end of the project. And let me tell you, never do that. Start from the beginning to the end. Do not skip. Be sure to set keyframes of the current placements before and after every scene or sequence they're used in, and check every aspect of them. I draw my images together, but move them later with the Animate tool and add action lines and other tools to convey motion, such as clothes, hair, tails, balls. You can import GIFs or image files for backgrounds or more, and use the Animate tool for great effect, or to great effect rather. For most backgrounds, I simply expand them and then change them drastically throughout. It's also good for editing imported images by changing their size, or editing a character through shearing for memes or something. There's probably even more tricks you could figure out on your own. So explore, the little sideways and little tricks and shortcuts you could do with the Animate tool. What it simply does is move the image of the drawing in motion, and you could drag through the cells to keep it the same image, or transforming throughout. Why I use vector levels over I said that backwards, sorry. Why I use raster levels, toons raster levels specifically, over vector levels. They're just better. I barely even touch the vector layer, especially in animation. My computer may be competent, but it's not a behemoth. I switched to the XSheet just to view the project, and it's still laggy. Vectors are computed rows with individual line segmentations. You can zoom in almost infinitely and use all the tools. Yes, but also turn your processors into overdrive before even you're close to finishing a project. Think about your RAM, SSD, and your task manager. They will thank you. Digital art has the greatest learning curve I have ever seen. The eraser is great. The undo hotkey is god tier. You can practice from reference. I use PureRef. It's also free. Trace from exact reference and edit perspective endlessly. If you think drawing from reference make you a bad artist, grow up. Not much stopping your artistic progression other than yourself at that point. It's just a game of practice and patience. Art skill isn't all that necessary. There's also memes. Besides art skills for, animation, you can also export and make a bunch of memes. Edit images, morph them into hilarity, rotoscope something into something else, or just throw images together and hopefully someone will get the joke. And then finally, once you are finished and satisfied with what you have made, go up to the render tab. I do not trust the fast render to MP4. It doesn't work sometimes. So I go to the output settings and change the format to the desired format. The default is TIFF, which will make it, export as individual files. If your system closes after you press render and you end up with thousands and hundreds of files, that's probably why. I only changed format, the aspect ratio, dots per inch. It's already in high quality 4K to 1080p, so don't need to touch things there. Just what kind of file I need. And then, if we're done, we're done. Sometimes I go to Filmora to make sure that the audio is actually, audible. Because when you upload to things like TikTok and YouTube, sometimes the audio does not translate as well as when you heard it, when you were making it. And to edit, I use Filmora 9. Well, it's 10 now. But, volume is very important, and silence can be dull and awful, but necessary. Only use dead space and silence and volume for comedic moments, or if you have something visual to go with. My final message are, animation is hard, tedious, and tiring, but fun and rewarding process. And I love art. I also use other software such as PureRef, where you can input files directly from web browsers as reference, and Canva, where I make my thumbnails for free. Also, the snapshot button on Filmora is also a good tool to make thumbnails and to record video and stream and stuff like that. I use Streamlabs OBS. I highly recommend. Also free. That is all. Until we meet again, my friends, have a good day. Akuna to the mother tata. Support the creators for this free software. Don't forget to tip them for your thanks. I know I will try once I monetize.